When people ask me, what's your favorite island? I can never fully commit, though I know that Kingman Reef in the tropical Central Pacific Ocean is a top contender for the title. It was over 15 years ago when I first visited Kingman Reef. Our team from Scripps Institution of Oceanography was there to get an ecological snapshot of an undisturbed coral reef, and the ecosystem did not disappoint. When we splashed into the warm waters, we were met by dozens of gray reef sharks and curious red snappers. The bottom was covered by thick expanses of live coral and pink algae cementing the reef together. The clear ocean surrounded us with a feeling of life and vibrance, and my view of coral reefs and their potential to thrive was changed forever. These visions of underwater vibrance, however, are contrasted by the unassuming topside view as we approach the island. Like many coral atolls and reefs, Kingman has only the smallest ridges of emergent land. So as we steamed toward the island, it was unclear where the ocean ended and the reef began. It was only once we were within a few hundred meters that we could see the color of the ocean water change, indicating that the reef was near. Even with GPS and modern navigational data, I feared that the reef might find the bottom of our ship before we saw it. That fear was not unique to our ship's crew, but has existed since the earliest days of Western navigation. European explorers, traders, and military who began infiltrating the tropical waters of the world in the 16th and 17th centuries expressed a deathly aversion to coral reefs. Coral reefs, these seafarers knew, lurk just below the surface of the ocean, ready to claw the hulls of ships and steal the souls of sailors. Coral reefs created atolls in the middle of the ocean, and they also fouled tropical bays and passages. These seamen never knew where to expect a coral reef to emerge. And who is the culprit? The corals themselves. These corals were plants or animals. The taxonomists at the time didn't agree, but there was agreement that they grew swiftly. Corals were the weeds of the tropical seas, and no thought was given to dredging the beast to clear seaways, and corals would always grow back. Today, however, the narrative has shifted. No longer do we worry about corals growing too much. Instead, we worry about the corals dying. Corals, now known to be animals living in symbiosis with algae and other organisms, are listed among the most threatened group of organisms on the planet. In the mid-20th century, we worried about breaking the fragile skeletons by ship grounding, trampling, and the occasional nuclear test. By the end of the century, we worried about pollution and overfishing, with coastal development and a human population growing disproportionately along tropical coastlines. Now, we have our sights trained on the existential threat posed by climate change, heating tropical waters beyond the temperature where corals can persist. Without all hands on deck, we will be the last generation to ever see a coral reef. I didn't think very much about coral reefs when I was a kid. Growing up in a valley in Los Angeles, my childhood was consumed with sports and smog. I thought about the plants and animals of the planet, but beyond the bugs in yards and parks, my major exposure to the world's wildlife was found in magazines, Audubon, Cousteau, and some glimpses at my dad's magazines, National Geographic. The diversity of species and ecosystems was mind-boggling, and each article was like a research expedition. But for every introduction to a species, there was an equal and opposite dose of fear. Stories of discovery ended with an accounting of habitat loss, and tales of beautiful species concluded with the imminence of extinction. There was an emotional toll for me in these stories. I lamented that the growing human population had a singular and negative impact on the wildlife of the planet. With this growing eco-anxiety, I turned introspective as I continued through school. When I took job placement exams, the counselors would recommend positions like park ranger or forester. But I'd spent my life reading about rangers and foresters losing battles, one by one, the battles that I hoped would save the natural world around. At the same time, I watched engineers building elaborate products of human creativity, like satellites that could learn about distant galaxies, and medical professionals solving the most complex of health issues. What would happen, I thought, if we combine the applied mathematics of engineering with the wildlife challenges of a park ranger? Today, I lead the 100 Island Challenge, a research campaign following the long tradition of global research here at Scripps Oceanography. Our goal is to learn what makes one coral reef look different and work differently than another. With the 100 Island Challenge, we're systematically conducting ecological surveys that capture a snapshot of the fishes and the corals living on more than 100 islands, using the natural experiment that is the variability of coral reefs worldwide. We work in 17 countries spanning the tropical waters of the Pacific, Caribbean, and Indian Oceans. And we've been using research tools that provide scientific insights for today, as well as archival data for tomorrow. New technology is helping us to share much of what we see, not the least being the use of large area imaging, sometimes referred to as photomosaics. In a process analogous to how we create satellite views of cities and forests, we can collect images of thousands of corals living in one location and create a high-resolution composite view of that reef. And because we've entered the era of big data, in which computers and storage allow us to leap from megabytes to petabytes, we can visualize these reefs in 3 dimensions without ever getting wet. The data collected from this global gradient have allowed us to explore fundamental hypotheses in marine ecology, as well as to provide some observations and generalities of how coral reefs are faring as we enter the 2020s. At first pass, the data collected support a common theme in natural resource monitoring. The structure and functioning of coral reefs change when assaulted by intensive extraction, pollution, or extreme ocean events like climate change. But through these insights come more and more reports of special reefs, with corals that are growing, often growing fast, despite the list of modern challenges. On Curacao in the southern Caribbean, one section of the coastline has been getting bathed by the outflow waters of the energy and water desalination and cogeneration facility for the past 60 years. My colleague Mark Vermey has been watching this reef build over the past 20 years. In these hot and salty waters lives one of the most extensive populations of the boulder coral, Colpophilia. Classical thinking would suggest that all the corals would be dead, but a new reef has emerged in our lifetimes. Analogous stories of coral reefs thriving in extreme conditions can be found across the globe, from the outflow waters of a nuclear power plant in southern Taiwan to the smoldering trash island of the Maldives. These reefs are special because they deviate from the expectation, namely that corals should not thrive in hot waters. In the Phoenix Islands, lying along the equator in the Western Pacific, we've been tracking how a coral reef responds to changes in temperature. At the turn of the millennium, the splendid coral reefs of these remote parts of the Republic of Kiribati received a global insult, the El Niño event of 2001 and 2002. The ocean temperature rose, staying unusually warm for almost a year straight, and the corals bleached and died. However, after about a decade, we watched the reefs regrow. New corals replacing the old, and a reef reemerged. But the ocean keeps warming, and another marine heat wave hit in 2015-16, with temperatures more extreme than in 2001. This time, the corals did not die en masse. Despite some mortality, the coral colonies soldiered through the warmth. It looked like the corals that repopulated after the first big event were different than those that faced the second event. Are we seeing evidence of adaptation to a changing climate? These anecdotes of shifts in the workings of corals, especially in response to a changing climate, are repeated across many of the 100 islands. The critical question arises: if warmer conditions are detrimental to corals, how can repeated events of warm water lead to corals growing? This is what we aim to find out. The conventional view of many ecological models is the idea of stationarity. This is a simplifying assumption that the environment, and the way an organism faces the environment, will remain the same through time. We know that the environment is not stationary. What if the organisms themselves also change? What if the corals that repopulate the Phoenix Islands are not different species, but a recovering abundance of a thermally adapted population of the same species? What if we're watching the workings of the corals themselves shifting through time, leveraging the levers of adaptation? Understanding the portfolio of biological mechanisms for adaptation in corals and their symbionts is prerequisite for building impactful interventions. Corals can adapt to changing conditions through a number of mechanisms, through shifts in the type of symbiotic algae, alterations in the microbial layer, or shifts in the expression of the genetic code of the animal itself. While the biological potential of these mechanisms has been documented in laboratory studies, We have no idea whether the changes are realized in nature. The 100 Island Challenge offers us a glimpse that corals appear not to be stationary, but just what levers of adaptation are being used. While our efforts to date have elucidated what makes one coral reef look different than another, to study adaptation, we must consider what makes one coral colony look different than another. We aim to unpack these fundamental ecological processes by leveraging biological big data, helping to make climate adaptation for coral reefs a reality. Linking the tools of ocean observation with modern techniques in genetic sequencing and data analysis, we can start to look not just at trends in how many corals live, but instead the intricate details of which corals survive and how they did it. We can document patterns of symbiosis, ecological change, and evolution, each the building blocks of biological adaptation across the world's coral communities. And our team at Scripps Oceanography is leading this global effort with our internal facilities across UC San Diego and through partnerships worldwide. We're in the midst of the grandest experiment of environmental change that modern humanity has ever seen. If we don't capitalize on this natural experiment, we'll miss an opportunity that won't just come once in a lifetime, it hopefully will happen only once in the course of humanity. The opportunity and responsibility is upon us to learn how species and systems are adapting to the changes around them. Adaptation is happening within corals and across entire coral reef systems. And these adaptations will spread, and our team is readying to decode nature's solutions and help them to spread faster. We aim to use our relationships with scientists, resource managers, and leadership worldwide to help implement these solutions that favor the persistence of corals. Only nature can tell us how it'll face the future. And for us to accelerate the path to recovery, we need to offer the nudges that most efficiently move reefs along a path of resilience. We need to listen to coral reefs as they tell us strategies that will navigate the challenges ahead.